As you crawl through the rubble, you look up toward an ashen sky. The meager contents of your heavy rig clatter against your back as you lug yourself over concrete battlements. You can't see your footing beneath the strata of metal, stone, and flesh, but that doesn't deter your progress as you push past an array of soldiers' helmets impaled on pikes, and in the distance, you can see the turret of a long-dead war engine, fashioned in much the same way. Shortly, you reach the top of the debris pile, upon which is seated a fortification where a battalion of soldiers emerge. One of them sounds the alarm, and you watch as rifles are raised and the footmen take aim at a rapidly encroaching procession of creatures, part man and part machine. The cyborgs run like zombies into the hail of gunfire, and while many are downed, some reach their targets. You don't stick around to watch what happens next. After all, it's not your war. So instead, you turn left, sneak to the top of the embankment, and gaze down at the awe-inspiring sight beyond. Before you are miles upon miles of trenches built as much into the earth as they are carved among the residual scraps of a war that's been raging here for generations. The fighting at this place, which they call the Elephant Mausoleum, never ceases. Many of the fighters have lived here for their entire lives, and yet new troops seem to arrive and fall back every day. In the plains beyond, scattered pockets of opposed soldiers wander the desolated countryside, scurry fleetingly behind enemy lines, or pray to their larger-than-life mechanized compatriots, their guardians, who will lead them to either victory or death. The sight is undoubtedly grim, but you're used to it. After all, it's true what they say. War never changes, and you're just here to find a little water, pick up a little scrap, and reach the extraction point in hopes that you can live another bleak day. This is the future posed in the Forever Winter, a cooperative PvE extraction horror looter shooter from Fundog Studios. The game is set in a dismal, futuristic hellscape where a world-encompassing war seems to rage across every corner of Earth's surface. The cities and splendors of the old world have fallen long ago, and humanity has utterly lost himself in the fighting. No one seems to be able to agree how the war started, and few seem to care, because by the year 20XX, those that started the war are all dead. Today, the aimless efforts are kept alive only by AI, godlike tactical intelligences that produce, conscript, and oversee humans and machines alike, producing legions upon legions of combatants, with the only real effort being to keep the fighting going. In such a future, though, once mundane resources have become commodities, as even the fighting forces have taken to recycling mechanical and biological components alike, it's become harder than ever for everyday people to survive, and you are one of those people. In the Forever Winter, we play as a scavenger, or scav, occupying a small subterranean hideaway simply known as the Innards. Together, with up to 3 friends, your job is to make your way to the war-torn surface, and to bring back any supplies that you can carry, especially if it's water. But how did we get to this point? How did a world like this one even develop? Who are the opposing forces at play, and where are things going next? These are all questions that you may find yourself asking while traversing the wastes, so allow me to take you on a journey through all of the lore that we know so far. This is the beautiful and terrible world of the Forever Winter. So first things first, we have to set the stage and explore how it is that we got to this point to begin with. But to do that, we have to turn to a rather unorthodox source of information. Not the game itself, nor promotional or supplementary material, but rather another YouTuber. See, on September 17th, 2024, a whole week before the Forever Winter came out, fellow YouTuber Riloe produced a video in which he spoke extensively with Fundog Studios' development team, and learned a lot of information both about the story and the game's inspirations that was really eye-opening. It's a great video, and if this topic or this game is interesting to you, then I'm going to have it linked in the description, because I think it's an essential watch at this point in the Forever Winter's life cycle. What Riloe covers most extensively is the war's beginning, and how it all came to be. So, to get things started, I'm going to reframe what it is that we know so far, and then we'll take it from there. In the time before the war, the world consisted of at least 3 global superpowers: Europa, Eurasia, and Euruska. Europa was the largest of these powers by landmass, controlling most of North and South America, as well as a good portion of Eastern Europe. In spite of their size, though, we're told that in the distant past, the once great Europa would concede large parts of its robust population to famine, disease, and increased levels of pollution. Food and clean drinking water became more scarce, and as the world changed, Europa struggled to change with it, which would oppose them both diegetically and culturally with Eurasia, a wealthy and technologically advanced power that occupied much of the opposite side of the globe, their territory spanning from Eastern to Central Asia. Eurasian society, we're told, was positively defined by advancements in technology, especially in the biosector, having generated new means of cultivation and advanced cybernetic implants for human use. What Eurasia had in technology, though, they lacked in space. Eurasian cities became overcrowded and left with nowhere to expand. Thus, both superpowers found themselves stuck in a sort of deadlock. Both Europa and Eurasia were in desperate need of what the other had, and so tensions would rapidly rise around the globe. But sandwiched between both of them was our third and final player. Not much is known about Euruska prior to the conflict, except that having dominion over the majority of Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Russia, they would have been placed in a very uncomfortable position. If Europa and Eurasia were to go to war over Europe, they would see the fallout directly, so it was perhaps in a bid to avoid being attacked on both sides that Euruska would go on to ally with Eurasia, though the specifics of how and precisely at what point the alliance was formed are not known today. Regardless, tensions would inevitably boil over, and it's not clear who struck first in the end. Bombardments fell across the globe, major cities were wiped from the map, and most critically of all, those in charge, generals, politicians, and leaders, were killed. With their handlers out of the picture, the autonomous systems tasked with printing war machines and conscripting soldiers would continue to operate unchecked, and as the forces on each side continued to grow, so did the scope of the fighting. It's said that today, pockets of civilization still exist in the hearts of the major territories, though not undisrupted. Martial law hangs heavily over the heads of civilians. Military enlistment is commonplace on both sides as well, with Europans being afforded certain freedoms on the front lines that they aren't otherwise, and in Eurasia, the citizens are compelled to service in a different way. The lowest ranks of Eurasia are almost unwaveringly comprised of the power's poorest citizens, who've been turned by force into biomechanical weapons. Their minds still intact, the bodies of these soldiers are controlled contrary to their will, compelling them to combat in whatever way best serves the unknowable, artificial sentience behind the Eurasian campaign. Euruska has also taken to many aspects of their allies' culture and aesthetics, though with elements of occult religious esotericism mixed in. While the Eurasian army is more uniform, Euruskan troops are easily some of the battlefield's most experimental units, using biomechanics to their advantage to create demented man and machine hybrids, working and reworking the relationship between living beings and automata. Members of each of these factions can be found in and around the war-torn territory that was once the American West Coast, in the remnants of the proud city of Los Angeles, likely a morphological derivative of the even older Los Angeles. This is where the Forever Winter takes place, and so next we're going to turn away from how this war was instigated and instead look to how it stands. In the next section, we're going to get a comprehensive view of the units and themes that represent each of the 3 armies, as well as exploring the ways in which they intersect with us as scavs, and where better to start than with Europa. As mentioned previously, Europa has undeniably stuck to a highly specific, highly recognizable style of what would, by the year 20XX, largely be considered legacy militarism. Their troops, ranging from foot soldiers all the way to their largest units, are traditionally recognizable, and utilize weaponry that would be employed today. This style owes at least in some part to Europa being decidedly behind the technological curve when compared to Eurasia and Euruska, not benefiting from the many advancements of Eurasia prior to the war, and instead continuing to produce what they already know and draw from vast stockpiles of military supplies dating back to the 21st century, though the sheer amount of resources they've accrued in that time also make them the single most diverse army in terms of unit variation. As a result of these constraints and the culture of the European people, humans still play a massive part in their war effort. European soldiers are traditionally clad in somewhat standard military wear, including pants, shirts, and tactical gloves colored in some variation of gray, brown, and dark green. Most units are equipped with chest rigs of varying robustness and heft based on their position, which, along with their helmets, can be used as a descriptor of rank. At the bottom of the totem pole is the general European soldier, the most basic in terms of both rank and utility. They're usually found donning a dome-like helmet equipped with a headset and wielding the standard SCAR or M16. Most of the time, these footmen can be found in the presence of other, larger or more powerful units, both man or machine, and on occasion they may be encountered without a helmet or armor at all. Wounded soldiers often remove their backpacks and headgear, but are nevertheless prepared to take up arms at a moment's notice. Similar to the soldiers are spotters, another infantry unit that looks nearly identical, but who are equipped not with rifles, but instead with the Chris Vector 45 submachine gun. These footmen are generally deployed alongside snipers, who wield powerful NTW-20 long-range rifles, which can also be observed rarely on general soldiers. One of the specialty units that can usually be found backed by a number of soldiers, or in a group comprised of their own kind, are the Grin, who are the first European infantry force distinguishable by their clothing as well as their weapon. The Grin come stocked with all of the usual wear, but with their rounded helmets replaced for heavier, flat-topped ones, and wielding powerful automatic shotguns, making them something of a threat at close range, though, being only lightly armored, they're similarly easy to dispatch. It's with the elite soldier that the true might of Europa begins to shine through. Often assuming the role of officers, these units possess larger chest rigs and several additional pouches and utilities around their waist. They have more armor on their shoulders, wrists, and knees, and their helmets have a unique studded appearance that helps further separate them from the rest of the pack. And in terms of weapons, they're equipped with M4s or M60s. One step up from them is the EOD, Europa's heaviest, non-specialized infantry unit, characterized by their similarly bulky frame, full face covering, and multiple layers of armor around their neck, shoulders, wrists, hips, knees, and ankles. They also possess very bulky backpacks which appear armored in their own right, and tote modified MG-34 light machine guns equipped with bayonets, perhaps an homage to the implement's significance during the Revolutionary period in the United States. Seeing as the city of Los Angeles is located on the American West Coast, Europa occupies a defensive position in most or all of the areas that we can access in-game, and this is also evident in the placement of M20 turrets at many of their checkpoints, outposts, and encampments. These automated sentry guns rain fire down at high speed and are known to rip apart ground troops and drones alike with minimal difficulty. Speaking of drones, Europa's can be identified due to their unique cylindrical body plan that minimizes their profile from directly below or above. Like all battle drones, their main use is in aerial combat, armed with machine guns used against ground troops and in drone-to-drone combat, but they may also be used for reconnaissance. The Europeans also utilize a selection of vehicles to dominate lesser enemy infantry and combat medium-sized units. These include the EXO, a small battle mech controlled by a single pilot, often seen escorting lesser personnel, and the Merkava tank, which boasts a 120mm smoothbore gun, as well as an M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun mounted to the top of the chassis. The Merkava is fast, covered in thick armor from turrets to treads, and difficult to take down even for an experienced group of scavs. It's also concerning these tanks that the Europeans have developed a strange and macabre habit. On rare occasions, they've been observed covered by the cadavers of the fallen in order to create Merkava body tanks. The purpose of these units is threefold. First, it adds some level of protection to the tank's surface underneath, though likely a rather trivial amount when compared with the thick plate armor underneath. Secondly, though, and perhaps more crucially, it also seems to serve a psychological purpose, a blatant warning to those who get in the way of European might. However, considering Europa's enemies and some of their creations, it's tough to know who they're really trying to scare. Lastly, it's also worth noting that on a cadaver-strewn field, the bodies on the tank may serve as some sort of camouflage. But that's something we'll talk more about when we get into the Eurasian army. The tank's power still pales in comparison to the largest of Europan's offerings that we can see in-game, and that's their medium mech. Often seen on the horizon, the sheer mass of the medium mech is matched only by its Euruskan alternative, which we'll talk about later on, but these titans of battle are hard to miss. Each is equipped with a colossal railgun, so large as to be most useful against enemy vehicles and equivalently sized mechs. Yet the hulking frame still possesses the mobility to readily swing the gun in all directions, making the medium mech capable of covering itself from all sides. And if that wasn't enough, its rear-mounted minigun allows this beast to fend off whole battalions of soldiers simultaneously. Now we move into the forces of Eurasia, which are different in a number of notable ways. Although not exclusive technology to just them, the Eurasians rely much more heavily on the mass production of new units, as opposed to drawing from legacy military stock. Not only this, but owing to their technological superiority prior to the war, every Eurasian unit down to the lowest infantry are heavily equipped with cybernetics and combat implants. Implants that, as we already addressed earlier, hide their former humanity. Cyborgs on the front lines vary extensively in their function and form, likely due to them being repurposed several times over the course of several consecutive battles. Some simply run headlong into opposing forces, while others scramble on all fours, and yet others still have been blown in half and merely pull themselves along pathetically on their forearms. But just above these mechanical fodder, in rank and file, are these Borgs, who are different both in that they're actually equipped with weapons and in their appearance, donning what appears to be a severed human face over their endoskeletal chrome. These specimens are slightly tougher than the others, and as potentially indicated by their ability to use guns, these Borgs also demonstrate behavior more conducive to a higher level intelligence. They could even be seen as strategic, assuming and holding a more distanced position from the enemy, as opposed to the hauntingly mindless sprint of their compatriots. The reason for this behavior, as well as their durability, is unclear, but it's thought that these tougher cyborgs may simply be newer units. Less damage from repeated fighting gives them the prerequisite control to wield their standard P90 submachine gun, but over time, perhaps these bots too are destined to wear down into walkers, then crawlers, and finally into scrap. A rank above these rabble are the officers, more tactical and heavily armored cyborgs possessing unique futuristic helmets. These are Eurasia's most advanced gunners, capable of both afflicting and sustaining heavier fire, but their toughness still pales in comparison to the Brawler series. Clad in red, heavily padded armor with some possessing face masks, these units aren't particularly fast, but they function like a more imposing and deadly version of these things. Brawlers will pursue a target relentlessly, and just one hit is enough to do in most scavs, as well as infantry combatants. These things are exceptionally strong, and are not to be trifled with, especially as they can appear in moderately sized groups. But even more threatening still is the elite brawler, who looks very similar, except for their padding being a shade of gunmetal gray instead of the iconic red. Accompanying all units, or quite literally flying solo, we have the Eurasian drone, a machine with a larger profile than their European counterpart, but similar both in terms of firepower and directive. Eurasia's greater aerial threat, though, is their choppers, officially called Hind choppers, according to the quest Hind Nav Comp. They can often be seen above the battlefield patrolling areas, but mercifully are generally passive to scavs unless fired upon first. Finally, though, Eurasia's air force would not be complete without these as of yet unnamed V-shaped gliders. These aren't combatants per se, but are instead used in some areas to airdrop additional cyborgs into the fray. We can see this both in-game and in a cinematic that was released by Fundog prior to the game's launch, where their relatively haphazard method of delivering troops to the front lines may also help to explain away why some of the Eurasian cyborgs are often damaged before we ever even encounter them. It also continues to hammer home just how disposable Eurasia views their troops to be, which is really saying something in a setting like this, where tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of lives seem to be turned over on all sides pretty much every day. Together, these three Skyborn units are the only ones in the entire army which are not humanoid. But before we can move on to Euruska, there's one final Eurasian unit that we need to discuss. At night, when the fighting ceases or moves underground, the battlefield falls largely silent. Though some units remain, wandering aimlessly or spontaneously attacking one another in short skirmishes, night is also a time when the landscape is picked clean of the day's fighting. It's here when many of Eurasia's cyborgs may be recovered and, well, effectively recycled to serve further in coming battles. And on rare, terrible occasions, scavs who venture out at night have caught sight of the ones who are doing the recycling. Moving quietly through the trenches and across the plains, the Eurasian Mother Courage will absolutely leave a lasting impression on those who encounter it. Appearing alone or in groups, Mother Courage manifests as a massive female humanoid. Ascending from a pair of metallic legs, they can often be seen with the remains of freshly harvested cyborgs affixed to their waist. Their long, scissor or knife-like hands are perfectly engineered to parse organic flesh from electronic circuitry, both of which are promptly collected to be reused in the cyclical ecosystem of war. But most disturbingly of all is her head, framed by shoulder-length black hair, which presents a gentle, almost peaceful red face, that of a human woman, yet with blank, expressionless eyes and a mouth that seems incapable of opening. Although Mother Courage units are rarely spotted owing to their purely nocturnal nature, there can be no doubt that they've solidified themselves as icons of the Eurasian army, and they are also, in spite of their hauntingly quiet work, her most formidable. To say that Mother Courage is nearly impossible to bring down through conventional means is not an understatement. Their massive size, combined with their thick, armored skin, ensure that volleys of even the heaviest ammunition that a scav can muster will have practically no effect. Thus, engaging with one, even alongside a large group, is heavily advised against. After all, she has no qualms about adding you to her stock of flesh. But last and certainly not least, we have Euruska, who is quite the opposite of their Eurasian allies in that the majority of their army is composed of some of the Forever Winter's most heavy, unorthodox, and mechanically inclined troops. When taken together, Eurasia and Euruska easily present a combined fighting force matching, if not exceeding, the diversity of Europa. But it's been Euruska's impressive advancements in areas of both traditional military technology and human experimentation that have led them to have some of the most powerful combatants in the entire war. Euruskan soldiers are both padded and armored in traditional green camouflage, and can often be found without helmets. They employ arms commonly used and invented by the Russians, such as the standard AK or RPK rifle, and can easily match or even surpass the power of the average European soldier. There are, of course, heavier units among their ranks as well, who are generally larger in frame, employ long coverings to further protect their legs, and don fully plated helmets for further protection. Like their more unarmored compatriots, these units similarly possess unmodified AKs. One step up the chain in command are the Euruskan officers, which are very similar in appearance to general infantrymen, but their grenade launchers can deal heavy damage and stun those who take them on. Unarmored versions also exist. A relatively rare foot soldier, the Rider is a visually distinct unit, donning coveralls and equipped with a rubber gas mask. Presently, whole squads of these units can be found rarely, where they engage the defending Europans, but concept art from Fundog shows them, as their name would suggest, riding atop other units, most particularly Eurasian drones, which seems to be a feature that we could see implemented in the future. Obviously, such functionality would make the Riders fairly unique in the field of battle, but Euruska's final infantry type is more closely comparable to their Eurasian allies. The Orga mech is a heavy brawler unit that, all in all, is a relatively rare sight. Like other traditional brawlers, these units are unarmed, but make up for it with a battery of martial attacks. They're durable, powerful, and bear Euruska's finest in military wear. But the real terror and flavor of Euruska comes not from their foot soldiers, but from their other, larger, and more creative units, one of which is the Grabber. A wholly unique cyborgian creature that moves on all fours, it's extremely fast and well armored, causing it to be nearly impossible to destroy through conventional means, while also possessing possessing the ability to tear apart infantrymen with animalistic efficiency, and it may even hold its own against larger units should it be so inclined. Nothing else quite like the grabber exists at the moment, making it easily recognizable and doubly fearsome. Like Europa, the Euruskans also possess a certain variety of tank, the T-90, which uses a smoothbore gun as its main form of offense, along with a NSV 12.7mm anti-aircraft gun alongside. It is in many ways equal and opposite to the Merkava, though there are no reports of them being lined with the dead, thankfully. In terms of mechs, there are two in the Euruskan fleet, and although similar in size, they differ wildly in use, with the first being one that you may already be familiar with, and that's the Euruskan Toothy. One look at this thing sends a clear signal. This is a powerful beast, armed with a railgun on its right arm and a swiveling MG-42 machine gun on its left shoulder. However, the Toothy is not traditionally seen as an offensive weapon. Instead, it's used primarily for escorting other troops and performing duties akin to a combat medic. The Toothy mech may also very well be one of the most well-known and unique units in the entirety of Euruska, if not the entirety of the war, because they come standard with a uniquely innovative feature so macabre that only the Euruskans could have properly implemented it. Attached behind the rig's right shoulder are a selection of body bags, which are apparently intended for use as mobile emergency life support pods that will allow the mech to sustain and protect wounded soldiers while evacuating combat. But the bags can also be used in the reverse sense, to siphon biofuel from the bodies to the mech itself. This means that some Toothies are in fact predatory. It is very possible for them to simply take off on their own and sustain themselves entirely off of the very same peoples that they're meant to protect. But the Toothy is still perhaps not the most imposing Euruskan force, at least at the time of recording. For that distinct honor goes, of course, to their medium mech. Like the European alternative, these rigs are generally deployed in pairs, and have a distinct rounded appearance about them. They're uniformly equipped with massive and imposing automatic railguns, and can often be found striking at enemy tanks, drones, mechs, and even pockets of foot soldiers. Now hopefully this overview gives you some idea of the general composition of these factions, but it's worth noting that what I've just presented is not an entirely exclusive list. Even if you don't consider the fact that what we're seeing now is only a small part of the wider implied scope of these units and this war, there are individuals, or whole squads, that stand out from the crowd. As the one strict order of rank and file has begun to degrade over time, some units have gone rogue, or have begun operating in a fashion atypical of their usual conscripted role, with a rare few even earning themselves a level of acclaim in the process. It seems that many such figures tend to come out of Europa, likely owing to the individuality afforded to their soldiers when opposed to their enemies. It's also more in the culture of Europa to both exchange and record stories of their heroes, though Euruska does sort of tend to do a similar thing in a more religious context. Some of these legendary figures include the Tormentor, a one-of-a-kind modified EOD with a blue face mask, evidently deployed to single-handedly push back Eurasian forces. We can encounter them ourselves in the Ashen Mesa after accepting the quest Tormentor's Trail, and they definitely possess the power to back up the legends about them. It's evident that, like many legendary units, the Tormentor is not only a tool to strike fear into the hearts of the opponent, but also to further galvanize those on the front lines. Imagine for a second that you're a European foot soldier who's been fighting for days on the brink of death against an onslaught of enemies that just keep coming. Then, all of a sudden, this guy walks up, guns them all down, and tells you to basically just sit tight while he solos the entire enemy army. I mean, it's no wonder that he's earned such a legendary status, and you definitely remember that blue face mask. There's also the Red Baron, a red-painted exo with several legendary kills attributed to its name, making it a galvanizing symbol among its fellows. And of course, we can't forget the Pyro, who's probably my favorite legendary unit in this game so far. A figure of unknown origin who seems to be allied with Europa, it's hard to say for sure what the Pyro's goals actually are, other than simply decimating Eurasian cyborgs. Wielding a grenade launcher which they've used to fell countless enemies, the Pyro dons a very unique getup that definitely helps attribute to his legacy, as no variation of it appears anywhere else in the game. It consists of a modified spacesuit, the type used by astronauts in the 21st century, which has been retrofitted for combat on the front lines. Most iconically, though, is the Pyro's headpiece. a torn, bloodied, and discarded American flag that they wear like a hood, almost certainly without even knowing what the pattern on it actually represents. Like the Tormentor before them, the Pyro has gained the attention of the greater Eurasian army, but unlike him, they don't even have any intel on the Pyro, since he doesn't even seem to bear a military ID. He's a total rogue, and we don't even know for sure that he's European affiliated. It's only the vague indication of some military training that lets onto that idea at all. This character, I think, is just a perfect representation of what the Forever Winter is all about. The look is perfect and tells you so much about not only the character, but also the world they inhabit in a single glance. It's brilliant design. It should go without saying that there's also likely a lot more designs just like these that simply haven't been introduced yet. This piece of concept art, for example, is one of many that alludes to a much greater variety of mechanized weapons on both sides. In fact, there's already some info for one of them. See this massive quadrupedal gun platform? Well, it has an official name, Big Green, so it's clear that there are still some unimplemented concepts that Fundog are actively thinking about. There are plenty of other novel ideas here too, from enormously sized grabber-like creatures that stand on their hind legs, to small insectoid robots that seem to double as mobile artillery units and pack mules. There's just a whole slew of other ideas that have yet to materialize within the game, and at least some of them definitely seem like they could be seen on the battlefield before too long. But we can't round out the lore of the Forever Winter without talking about a fourth and final faction that we haven't touched on as heavily, a group which everyone in the world seems to be aware of, even if only seeing them as a nuisance. And those are the Scavengers. See, life as a scav is not as rare or unlikely as it may at first seem. We are in fact led to believe that there are several, perhaps even hundreds or thousands of independent bastions of scav populations living all over the Western Americas, if not in other places as well. And from shanty towns to the underground, Europa, Eurasia, and Euruska have all begun to realize that these isolated populations can benefit them in unique ways. Scavenger services don't always come cheap. They work in trade for valuable water and credits, but oftentimes are capable of things that larger, less guerrilla forces of the Big Three are not. Espionage, looting, theft, contract killing, and more. If it can be devised, there's a scav who's willing to do it. As such, scavengers are known to communicate through diplomatic bureaus with each of the three global superpowers. The Western Embassy, Eastern Consulate, and Spetsnaz or Special Forces Commission each represent Europa, Eurasia, and Euruska respectively, and all of them confer with scavs independently of one another. In-game, the representatives from each bureau, Luca, Kane, and Vladulitz, are first introduced to us by Slade, a fellow scav who knows their way around the underground, but it's unclear to what extent these diplomatic bodies exist outside of the bastion of safety that is the innards. It's one of the seemingly few places where members of opposing factions can truly coexist, selling wares from their respective cultures, even if only in the form of guns, and assuming neutrality when hiring against one another. For all we know, it may be an uneasy peace, but it's still a peace at the end of the day. And, as I hope we've learned today, peace is a beautiful thing. There are still many aspects of the world of the Forever Winter that have yet to be illuminated, from the macabre architecture reminiscent of the distorted visions of Bekjinsky to the cow balloons? We still don't know what that's about. There's a lot more to learn with regard to this world. But what strikes me most about the Forever Winter so far is just how masterfully that world has been crafted. It has such a distinct and palpable identity that the possibilities for stories to be told in it are almost endless. The European campaign perfectly sets the stage for stories of heroism, valor, and human tribulation, while the Eurasians and Euruskans allow for tales of wild, cyberpunk-esque technologies and future meditations into the deranged nature of this dystopia. Even the disjointedness of the world itself, with troops occupying points for years or generations on end, looking to their machines as deities and wandering the plains on crusades with no meaning, is conducive to a plethora of different varieties of genres and stories. I don't know, guys. I think Fundog has really done something special here. It's certainly not every day that a world as brimming with possibility as this one comes into being. I seriously think that if they play their cards right and really lean into bringing us some of those those tales through official means, whether it be through the game itself, or supplementary works, art books, graphic novels, stuff like that, we could have a world as robust and exciting as something like Mike Pondsmith's Cyberpunk. It really does have that striking of an identity in my mind. Regardless, I understand that if those things are planned, they'll undoubtedly take time to materialize. The game has just barely entered early access, so there is still undoubtedly a solid amount of the base game that needs to be finished. But what a good setting like this does is inspire people to be thinking about what else is possible, and that is certainly what the Forever Winter has done for me. It is massively exciting to get to be here in the beginning of what is hopefully a long-running and prosperous IP, an IP that never could have come to life in a AAA studio, but one which I sincerely hope has and will capture your imagination as thoroughly as it has mine. This is Averberon. I'll see you again soon, and have a good one.